Welcome, welcome. We are coming to you from Greater New York. We're so pleased to bring you our second chapter of We Were There. So Greater New York this time, what are we talking about? Natural disasters. We're happy to bring you some of our experts from our region to speak about things that happened here in New York City, in our New York region, the New York area, which includes Long Island, Metro New York, Greenwich, and New York City. Well, to get us started, we'll have Dorn, and after that, leading us through the discussion is Maddie. Take it away, Dorn. Thank you.
Thanks, Wiki. You go to the next slide. So as Wiki said, we're going to be talking about natural disasters today, just a little bit to get us into the discussion. According to the Department of Homeland Security, natural disasters include all types of severe weather, which have the potential to pose a significant threat to human health, safety, property, critical infrastructure, and homeland security. This is important because the number of natural disasters that cost over $1 billion has increased over the last 40 years, rising from an average of just 3 per year in the 1980s to 18 per year during the 2020s. In 2022, there were $18 billion disasters, and out of those 18, there were 474 deaths caused indirectly or directly by the natural disasters. While damage may not be visible, it's also important to remember that heat waves also are classified as a natural disaster and cause over 600 deaths per year. I say this as our region is preparing for our own heat wave that is forecasted to begin tomorrow, bringing a heat wave of over 105 degrees.
Thank you, Lauren. So first, I wanted to thank our panelists for spending some time with us today. I, for one, am very excited to hear and learn about your experiences as natural disaster responders and management. Would you mind introducing yourself, stating your current title, as well as your response role during Superstorm Sandy? We'll start with Brian.
So my name is Brian Gerber. Currently, I'm the Senior Disaster Program Manager for the Metro New York North and Long Island chapters. Back during Superstorm Sandy, I was actually a volunteer and I was supporting sheltering and feeding in Metro New York North.
Right.
Hello, everybody. Dario Diaz, I'm the Regional Disaster Officer here in Greater New York. During Sandy, I was actually overseeing mass care and logistics.
My name is Sal Montoro. I am a mass care chief. During Sandy, I was a mass care lead for the Long Island chapter.
Great, thank you. So we're going to just kind of jump right into Superstorm Sandy, if that's all right. So when did you first become concerned that the storm was going to have a large impact?
So normally during hurricane season, we start to pay attention to different weather patterns, the different storms that are brewing. Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy started to show signs, and we started monitoring. I believe at the time we were working on the 5-day cone from the National Hurricane Center. I believe we started to establish a heavy readiness work about 5 days pre-expected landstorm. But I know we were working ahead even before that, because what happened the year before is we had worked to the previous storm. Irene, I believe, was the one. And we actually had stood up an operation in the entire state of New York in different areas. So we were very worried. I think, sometimes you go through an experience and then you kind of get scared. So I think I would say between, 5 days, 7 days, but definitely 5 days, it was the heaviest concerns and readiness working towards preparing for the storm. From my end, I saw you were there, so I sounds about right.
Yeah, the difficulty for Sandy was that we were just looking at it at the beginning as a hurricane. And as it was coming up the line, that's how we were monitoring it, as a hurricane. And as it got less and less in strength, our readiness kind of, that 5 days out, at least for Long Island, kind of took a hold, because we were like, it's going to hit us as a as just a storm and not as a hurricane. But all of that changed probably, I'd say about 48 hours before that storm hit, when it started to be reported that there was going to be more than just that hurricane or storm hitting us at that point. It was going to be a combination of different storms meeting together. And it was going to be something like we had never seen before. You don't hear a lot about superstorms because they really don't happen very much. So we were really not understanding what was about to hit us. Until once about 48 hours out, we had started out with just opening up or preparing to open up 2 or 3 shelters, splitting it between Nassau and Suffolk County. But as we saw, it was going to be a lot worse. The different OEMs that we have on Long Island, the Office of Emergency Management, one in Nassau County and one in Suffolk County, both sounded the alarm and wanted us to open a lot more than that. And then it took a lot of scrambling at that point. So the preparation part, it started out slowly, but then it took a big hit and a big jump at that point.
In that same vein, how do you prepare yourself for large incidents and or deployments such as Superstorm Sandy when you don't really know what you're walking into? How much equipment is readily available for those kinds of things, either in the office or in our emergency management offices?
Well, I can start with that. Under normal circumstances today, if we go by the standards of today, within 24 to 36 hours, we can have different tractor trailer loads of materials being sent from different parts of the United States. Mostly we're coming from Pennsylvania to us if we needed cots and blankets and things like that to prepare. During Sandy, that wasn't really the way they did things. It was a little bit different. So we really kind of had to fend for ourselves. Luckily for Long Island, we had Connex boxes that we had donated years before that we filled with cots and blankets. So we had the material already stationed at a lot of the schools, and that was a godsend. I say it all the time, the senator who had appropriated those funds for us, every time I see him somewhere, I tell him all the time, he was the one that helped save so many lives because we had the material there. People knew if they went to shelters, there was a cot, there was a blanket, people would feel comfortable knowing that this was coming. And some of those materials were shared with all of us throughout the region as needed. But as far as Long Island went, we were pretty well prepared because of that grant. But that's not the way it's normally done. Today, it's a much better system where items are put centrally located in one place that are close throughout the country at different spots like that. So we can get material out to a place that we know it's going to be hit by a storm within 72 hours. We get it there beforehand.
So for me, for Superstorm Sandy, I was actually at the shelter at the Rockland Community College. The day it opened at about 4 o'clock that afternoon. It's one of the few times Rockland County has actually pre-opened the shelter. Normally they do a post-impact. They don't do usually prior to. And we were there and we had what we call a horse trailer. It's a 2-axle trailer, and we had cots and blankets, and we were set up in the field house. I think that night we had 57 people that were either brought in or came in on their own between having to be pulled out of their homes because there was flooding and stuff, or cars on roads that got flooded. But it was probably about 24 to 36 hours before when I actually got told, yeah, we're going to need you. So it's in line with what Sal was saying, that it wasn't till really the storm was almost right on top of us. And you were really hearing more about emergency plans. Like even I remember my town that I live in, the town of Haverster, was sending out emergency alerts, and they never do that. So that's really what caught me with that storm.
Just rounding a couple of things up. I mean, everything's been said, but to add, the roundup is, you talked about how do we know what we have, all year long, the job that we have is either to do mission, right? So do service delivery to clients, to people, or to be ready to do that, right? So you spend time on readiness or servicing clients. That's really what we should be doing in the emergency management field. So all year long, we're working on understanding what we have, what do we need, it's already, actually, this morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, the team on Long Island texted me saying, hey, we're going through these blankets. We want to do this, we want to do that. They actually were in those connexes that Sal's talking about it. So that's what we should be doing. So that said, we know in agreeing with Sal, at the time we were a little bit more segmented. Today, we're actually a more organized as an organization because you learn, right? You learn through times, and it's not just New York, it's a national thing. So we know what we have. We have an inventory, what we have in-house. The division, which is our next structure above, understands what's within the division, the Northeast, right? And then national understands what's within the country. And then what happens is all that is working together. There is a tracking system that says we have these things, we have them there. And then also there is a group of national, along with the local individuals that were saying, look, this storm looks like it's going to go this way, it's going to that way. So it looks like we may need these supplies. And this is all data driven decisions that are put together, right? And then those supplies, as Sal said, today will be pushed out by the national organization ahead of the storm. And one thing to highlight is we do have something called 120 hour timeline. It's very pretty standard in the business, especially in the hurricane type of operations, where you have warning, where we actually try to follow a set of steps that you do in readiness for that. And it tells you by this point, you should be moving supplies. You don't want to move the supplies as the winds are coming, things like that. So that's how, just wanted to touch up on that.
Oh, absolutely. That was great insight. So specifically for your response, when were you first mobilized and how long did you work on this response for Superstorm Sandy?
So for me, like I said, it was the day before the storm started, and I was in that shelter working the overnight shift for 4 days. And then I went to our Westchester office to help support feeding at that point, and I did that for another week. So roughly about 11 days I was working Superstorm Sandy.
For me, actually, so about, we'll say, 5 days official mobilization, meaning where we actually stood up here in operation, a headquarters. And I will say, I think I worked Sandy full time up to the month of April.
I worked Sandy 2 days before Sandy hit, and I stayed for 14 days after Sandy hit, working at the headquarters. For most of the time, the last 3 days, I ran a distribution of emergency supply station in Long Beach. And then from that point, I took a step back. Needed to take a step back for a while. You get burnt out very quickly.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, you worked with Red Cross volunteers from not only across the greater New York region, as well as other regions that are close to us. How is it working with Red Cross responders from different units?
I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I think that's the beauty, one of the most beautiful things about the Red Cross, right? Is that you have an organization that, you know, from the beginnings of it, even though it was related to you know, conflict and things like that, was that we are to be spending time getting ready during peace times, right? So it's getting ready and creating processes, creating protocols, learning how to work the same way. So then when these disasters come, we can also just plug in. So you pretty much stand up a Fortune 500 company within 24 hours, right? So you have standard procedures throughout the country. So it is beautiful actually to see. Is it chaotic? Yes, it's a disaster. It better be chaotic because that's what we're dealing with, right? Our job is to make sense of what's happening and try to get to some type of normalcy, right? So it's like a parallel universe, as my colleague, my predecessor, one of my mentors says. So it is beautiful because what happens is we have developed over the years this process, these protocols, and these positions that allow for everybody to just come in together and plug in, and then everybody understands their role. But more importantly, within the role, we're going to be following the same protocols, the same process, and we provide the same training throughout the country. And also, we even seen in other disasters, like for example, Maria in Puerto Rico, where we actually connect to the entire Red Cross and movement, where you have national societies from other countries that come in and jump in. And because we're guided by the same principles, we have similar values, we have these things that guide us together, then you're able to plug in. So it's a beautiful thing when you have people from all over the country. Yes, some show up with shorts. And one of the funny stories was normally hurricanes happen in warm areas. So people showed up in shorts in October, and then they realized it was cold because there was a snowstorm right after Sandy. So those are the funny moments, but it's the reality of Tesla. But when it came to the work, everybody steps in and works together.
Well, we found out that we were tasked with opening 30 shelters 48 hours before the storm was coming. And we absolutely knew we didn't have enough people to open those shelters. So we put the call out through national, through the proper channels that we wanted 200 people to come. 12 hours before the storm had hit, the last plane to arrive in Newark was a group of from JetBlue. There's a shelter team of employees from JetBlue who are people, the Red Crosses that come, they also work for JetBlue, and they come from throughout the country. They allowed that plane to land. Their plane was the last plane, and we had them shuttled to Long Island. So they were a group of about 12 people. They were the only group that got in to help us. So for us, they were a godsend. We had several people that drove in from other areas that were close by that came to help. But for the most part, for the first 24, probably about 48 hours, it was mostly Long Islanders that were working those shelters, along with those couple of people that came in. So it was a difficult time when finally that 48 hours, that 72 hours, when people did start to come in again, when the bridges were all opened and everything was given a clear, and the airports opened up. When those people started to arrive, it was absolutely a godsend to watch these people pour in, because this was our hometown that got hit. We didn't have power, but we still working as shelter workers, and who had a tree in their house and whose car got blown away, but they still came and helped. So when people came in from different parts of the country, for us, once again, it was a godsend, because it was happening to us. It wasn't that we were working a job somewhere. We were working in our own hometown. So
I just want to add something real quick there. I think important to highlight is that Hurricane Superstorm Sandy had a pretty long path, right? So you're talking about a storm that could have hit in different areas, right? So what happens is the Red Cross has to dedicate resources, and they cannot just say, we're going to send everybody to Long Island or to New York City, whatever. You had to have teams set up throughout the different states, different areas. And I think that that's important to highlight. That was another thing. So New Jersey, for example, where the storm actually entered, they had to have a team in place, right? Connecticut had to have a team. So you have different areas throughout the country that have people in place. So we had to be at first lean and having people throughout. As Sal said, then people then started being pushed up to this area when we saw that the damage was coming, or the storm hit this area. So that's important to highlight, that was something we had to deal with during Sandy, is that people had to be deployed to different states to be able to be ready for the storm.
today, just to piggyback on that, today, from the things that we learned during Sandy, today a team will be sent out to, let's say, a particular state or area where they think a storm may hit 72 hours before. So you might have 50, 75 volunteers sitting in a hotel room waiting for something to come. If 24 hours before that hits, that storm moves, they move all those people. So now those teams are in place and they go to help. Before, they used to wait until after the fact to start to send people. Today, because of the lessons that we learned from storms like that, we mobilize teams beforehand and move them where the storm is going to go.
Absolutely. So you're learning to lean on each other.
Absolutely.
So what was your biggest challenge in response personally? Start with Brian.
So I think for me, I was personally affected by the storm, but I still work the storm, staying in the shelter overnight. So for me, it was just that dealing with both things simultaneously. But that would be the thing that probably was the most for me.
It was huge. I mean, that's the key to the game. It was huge. We were all busy. This is the New York tri-state area that is tight. There's a lot of people, right? So the challenge is big, and so I think that's what I will say is the issue. Overall, right? But that comes within housing issues that you have in the area, right? So after people may have been displaced, there's very low amount of housing available after that, and all these other things. I think for me personally was the fact that it was in my home. Normally, I had been in large operations where I deployed and supported, but doing it at home is different because then you're dealing with it every single day, every single moment. Now when I deploy, I'm very mindful of the volunteers and staff that actually work an operation that are local. They're working and supporting their community, but they also may have been affected, but also just their lives in general, it's been altered. And I think that that's an important thing, so I had to travel here, and that was a very long travel. So I was working 10, 12, 15 hours a day, but also I was driving 6 hours, 5 hours sometimes because of traffic. Like, so those are the things that I think for me at a personal level was that it was huge, but it was tiring because it was in my home rather than where I go somewhere else in support, right? It's different when you're supporting yourself and those around you.
I think some of the challenges for me, or some of the difficulties, was that I had to put people to work in shelters as shelter managers that had really no experience in it. We just didn't have people. So when volunteers would show up, me and my team of what we were, we'd give them as much information as we could, and we'd tell them, just go to the shelter. And it was difficult. It was painful to hear the phone calls that would come in from people, from our own volunteers saying, like, what should I do? What am I doing? How do I do this? How do I do that? To know that we sent those people out, of course, remember, there were always safe places. We never sent anybody to a place. My children helped out. My son helped set up shelters with the court officers that were given to us by Nassau County. So he went out and helped set up shelters. So no place at any time was anything not safe, because if I wouldn't send my own children there, I wouldn't send my volunteers there. But it was difficult to know that I sent these people out without any training. And then they did an incredible job for the most part. But I think that's what pains me the most, that we had to do that we had to put people in uncomfortable positions. But they stepped up and did it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's difficult enough to draw a line between your work and home life, especially in humanitarian aid. But when it comes to your own neighborhood, it's a different ballgame. Yeah. So with that being said, what do you think the Red Cross learned from Superstorm Sandy? I know we touched on this a bit earlier, but if we could explain.
Well, I think we learned a lot. I think that Superstorm Sandy, let me take a step back. Even before that, I think that the Red Cross began to change after Katrina. The problems that were there, I worked in a shelter there for 2 weeks, and I saw I'll say difficulties that we went through there and how the organization just wasn't prepared properly. So I think from that point on, it began to change. And then after Superstorm Sandy, it changed even more. Today, the Red Cross is what it is because of the experiences that we had in those days. How has it changed? Well, I think that first of all, we're much more unified. When something happens, we've all learned to stay in our lane and to know that the training that we've done means something. It's not just, you took your classes, okay, but this person is going to do that anyway. No, it doesn't matter whether you're a paid staff member or a volunteer. During a gray sky disaster, during a DR, everyone has a job. That job doesn't mean anything. If you're a paid staff, it does not matter. And I see that firsthand now, and that's a great thing, because there are so many volunteers that have taken all the proper classes, have the proper experience, but in the past, they were pushed aside because, well, you're a volunteer. It's not like that today. Today, the organization is unified. It works better. It's learned a lot, and its leadership has learned how to work with volunteers much better than it did in the past. That's the way I see it. What do you think, boss?
No changes, no, I'm kidding. No, I have to say, again, look, I think we will not be who we are today over the years if we didn't learn from every disaster that we work in, so I agree. Sandy, Katrina, those are big ones that you have to learn. But I think even the little ones teach you a lesson, and then we evolve. And sometimes actually it's challenging for people that the amount of changes that we have to go through. But the reality is there are more disasters. We heard those numbers from Doran before. There are more disasters, they're bigger. So you have to keep learning and adapting and working on it and getting better at it. And I think we have, and there's so many ways that you can do that, that you can say or exemplify how it changed. But I think the key to it is that we continue to focus on the mission. So that doesn't change, but you continue to focus on the mission, but then you continue to move forward in adjusting to serve people and serve more people. And I think that's, to me, that's the beauty of the whole thing, is that we're focusing, we keep the North Star, which is the client. We use the power of the volunteer, the generosity of the donor, and then adjust and adapt. And okay, well, we learned that we saw Ida. You had a bunch of flooding in the middle of the city, now by the ocean. Well, we need to adjust now, right? So how we do business is not the same. So you learn that, and then so you're ready. So you have to stay agile, and I think that's what we've done as an organization: stay agile, and that has allowed us to get better.
I think what Sal and Dario both said is really spot on, because the organization has grown so much. I can remember back to Sandy, where when outsiders from outside the area would come in, it was not a cohesive team, but it was, okay, we're from outside, you're local, we're here, we're taking over. And you don't see that anymore. You see, okay, how do we all integrate together to support the clients, support the local volunteers, support the local leadership. Some of the other things that they're doing, transition plans from regions now. So that way everyone's connected and there is that transparency and no one feels like they're left out. So I think we just grow and continue to grow.
And a quick interjection, does one mind defining blue sky and gray sky operations for us?
So blue sky or steady state is our day-to-day, us responding to the single family, multifamily house fires, canteening events, those regular stuff we do every day. Gray sky or operational state is us responding to those little bit larger disasters, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 families, all the way up through hundreds or thousands of people affected.
Thank you. That being said, we are going to move on to Hurricane Ida unless there's anything you'd like to say. Fantastic. Doran's going to go on here and really that.
Thank you, guys. Yes. I really appreciate the insight on that. Just to give some general overview of the national operation. So in the storm itself, now that we've heard of it. So Sandy was a 900-mile wide storm. It affected 24 states, cost over $65 billion in damages, and resulted in 117 US deaths, 53 being in New York, 34 in New Jersey. There was also a large fire in Queens, come to be known as the Breezy Point Fire, that resulted in 127 homes being destroyed. So this was a large operation, as you just heard. Our teams handled it wonderfully. A little bit more just in the numbers about what we did. The Red Cross is a national organization, deployed 17,000 volunteers and employees to mobilize to deliver relief. We provided sheltering and feeding locations, and we provided over 17 million meals and snacks throughout the operation to over 74,000 displaced individuals. There are many challenges, some of which you just heard, others including navigating in a city where there were blocked roads, closed bridges, and scarce gasoline supplies. And that's not just in the city, that's all over. When we navigated with 300 vehicles, we delivered over 7 million pieces of political relief supplies. And we provided aid to address the housing needs of impacted individuals, offering physical and emotional support services, as well as assistance in enhancing community preparedness during disasters. So this was it was a great learning opportunity. We also helped a lot of people, so thank you guys. And just one more note on Sandy, we're gonna watch a quick video, a testimonial from Alan and Shaniqua Watson from the Far Rockaways, them sharing their experience working with the Red Cross.
They really do.
Walked in, I expected to walk into the carpet being wet and maybe a puddle. That was it. But when I looked around and I seen what happened, it was bad. It was in disarray. Everything was all over. The couches was flipped back. The bedroom set, the dresser for some apparent reason was broken half. The kids' room was where it really hurt me because they had a million toys and all of them was just together and pushed all under everything. The Red Cross meant a lot. Due to since she was on paternity leave, it was only one income in our home. It was going to be hard to find a place. So once Red Cross stepped in, it was a blessing. And that's when we really felt like, okay, things are coming back in order.
Sometimes you see on TV, they like donate money to the Red Cross. And occasionally I've donated to certain things, you know, but when I actually had to use them, I was like, wow, they're here to actually help us. They really do help, you know. I never thought that a hurricane would have came. Never so close to home, it was actually my home. So the Red Cross is just, it's the best. It really is.
So thank you, Red Cross.
Talk about there's 74,000 people assisted, but seeing a family of 4 that we assisted, a family of 5 is really nice to see, and then put that in the picture. So I think we'll move on to Hurricane Ida 2021. I'll give a little bit of background on this. So this storm occurred 16 years to the day after Hurricane Katrina made landfall. Hurricane Ida made landfall on August 29th as a Category 4 hurricane in Louisiana with sustained wind speeds of 150 miles per hour. The remnants of Hurricane Ida arrived in New York City on September 1st, when Central Park recorded over 3 inches of rainfall in just 1 hour. Over $75 billion in damages and 1.2 million power outages were reported nationwide. Hurricane Ida caused 87 deaths in the United States, 13 of which were in New York City. Many of our city's deaths were attributed to basement flooding. The Red Cross coordinated with local, state, and federal officials to assist the affected communities. Nationally, the American Red Cross assisted 21,000, we provided over 44,000 overnight stays and over 1 million meals. Locally, the American Red Cross of Greater New York activated 491 volunteers and employees from 30 states to respond to Hurricane Ida. It's important to remember that this storm occurred during a time when many COVID-19 restrictions were still in place, not only nationwide, but within the Red Cross. Despite this, Greater New York offered safe shelter to 978 residents across New York City, Long Island, and Westchester County. Greater New York provided almost 1,200 meals and snacks, 5,600 cleanup kits, and 450 comfort kits. The Red Cross in our region also provided 1,800 health, spiritual, and emotional support contracts. So that's just a little bit about the background, and now we're going to get the inside scoop from people who are there.
Thank you, Doran. So we're gonna head into just about the same idea. When did you first become concerned that this storm was going to have a lot of impact?
So for me, I think, what was it? It was probably the last week of August when we first started talking about it, because it was hitting Louisiana, and the conversation at that point, if I remember, Dario, was about who's going to deploy to support the Red Cross down there. And then as it started to come on landfall and it started to hang and hook towards the East Coast, the initial forecast was that it was going to peter out and it was just gonna be a rainstorm, but we were still monitoring it because that's what you do. And then I know reaching out to the county OEMs in Metro New York North, they're all like, no, we're not opening shelters. We're not gonna do anything at the county level. And we actually, the day before the storm hit, we had one municipality in the entire region that asked for a shelter, which was actually Mamaroneck. And we actually opened the shelter about 12 to 18 hours prior to the storm hitting at the Mamaroneck High School. And on that opening night, we had 125 people in that shelter.
As Brian said, we've been monitoring and at the beginning was our focus was supporting, the South, right? So you hear either South, either North. We were deploying people. I believe by the time Ida hit us, we had over 30 individuals and actually a lot of leaders from within our region deployed out supporting the operation South. And actually at different areas because there was different areas affected. So I laughed when you asked when is because the vivid memory I have is as the storm is coming, unfortunately, it was expected to be a lot less worse than it was. But we had talked as a team, we had a meeting before everything happened and said, look, it's gonna hit us, so we have to be ready for it. But the truth is, it was worse than expected. But I do remember 11 o'clock at night, I think it was, on the phone with Brian and a couple others, and we're just talking like, a bunch of disaster geeks is really what it was. About, wow, look, there's water by my house, and this is what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm seeing. I remember I texted the team and said, look, the water, I sent pictures, the water is by the tires of my vehicle. And so we started to get worried, and as things are happening, there was some other crazy stories. We started to work it, but we had been working it for some time, whether it was to support the South, and then later on to prepare to respond locally. But I think it was that night when we started to see the changes and starting to see how real it was. I think it was a real-time change in posture and in how we were operating. We were all operating, and I think that the different thing also to keep in mind is that we were working at a different format because of COVID. So that was another interesting thing. So
We started to prepare with things like to see what hotels we were able to use, who had vacancies, what municipalities would allow us to use their facilities. We hadn't stood up anything, we hadn't opened anything, but we just started to prepare and wait. We took a wait and see attitude at that point. But it didn't really hit Long Island as bad as it did most of the other places. We ultimately, we did some work out there for it, but the preparation for us was more just wait and see, don't act so much because you just don't know where a storm like that is going to hit. So to open things up beforehand, it wasn't something that we had done.
Absolutely. So in preparation specifically, how did COVID hinder help your ability to kind of set up the materials you needed, albeit before or during?
So at that point, one of the biggest things was the organization was going through changes in their COVID guidance, and it felt like almost daily we were getting updates and changes. Plus also municipalities, counties, states were having their own guidance. So it was understanding, so for like us at the Mamaroneck shelter, Red Cross said masks were required. The town said masks aren't required, so it was that collaboration and making sure that everyone was on the same page. And the clients were really good about understanding and being respectful of each other, which I think was what made that shelter okay in that sense. But it was very challenging because, you had to look at what PPE, what personal protective equipment, meaning masks and gloves and other stuff do we need at the shelter. So it wasn't just cots and blankets and shelter admin kits, but all the other things. And also having the feeding vendors, because at that point we were doing pre-packed meals. So each individual would get their own meal in its own container instead of us doing our normal buffet style feeding into clamshells out of Cambros.
So I don't know, I'll start with probably what COVID helped us when it came to IDA. It's one thing, and that is that we have been for a year working in this hybrid model of being remote. And we knew how to work the technology, and we had the technology to do things. We had done a lot of readiness for it. So I think that there was an advantage that we all knew how to work from each other's homes to operate. But there was a lot of negatives that came with that. Number one is we were not together at the beginning. It was harder to get people together. There was a lot of restrictions how many people you have to have in a room. People were afraid of COVID still. A lot of individuals did not feel comfortable going out to work at a shelter, to come out in person. Those are real challenges. I mean, when you're talking about what we do in the Red Cross, it's about people. It's about clients, and it's about volunteers that support clients, right? So when you have those restrictions that COVID brought to us, that was very challenging. So that was one thing. Also, the buildings were not in use like they had been in the past. So some of the technology had to be rebooted and things like that. So the restrictions were huge, and we had to really work around them. Again, because we had learned for a year to work from a remote environment, we had the technology with us at least. So even when we came together here and we had challenges with the building, everybody still can function because their personal technology that Red Cross had helped us obtain and helped us work with was functioning very well. So that was the advantage there.
Yeah. As Dario says, the difficulties were, as a volunteer, is the restrictions that we had. You couldn't drive two people in a car. It was only one person making a delivery of stuff. If you used an IRV, one person could sit in the back. Well, we thought we weren't allowed to drive. No, we're changing it for now. The different things that we were unprepared for, being 6 feet away, but we had to see a client, but you can't talk to them. There was so many different restrictions. But you know what? Thank God we pulled through it. We did what we did because as volunteers, we were there for a reason. We had a job to do, and we stayed with the restrictions that were given to us, and they pounded the restrictions on us. They didn't let us do without it, and we did what we were told to do, and we did it the right way. It was difficult, but that's what we were there for.
Absolutely. So on the topic of technology, because we were all in on it, said, remote work and using technology is much easier for us. That being said, in the field, Hurricane Ida specific and not Superstorm Sandy, Katrina, whatever else, how reliable are tablets, phones, laptops in the field anyway? Because I would assume lots of the power is out. So how do we navigate that?
So I'm going to talk about Ida and the mark that was set up in the Mamaroneck.
What's the mark?
Multi-agency resource center. Yeah. So they had a multi-agency resource center set up in the Mamaroneck, but due to the flooding, the cell tower was down in the area. So internet connectivity via cell phone the first day was not good. But what was good was the county worked with the state to work with AT&T to bring in, and I don't know what the acronym stands for, a COW is what it's called, but it's a communication device where they could set it up anywhere and actually bring cell service or boost cell service in an area where they're having issues. So that was a win, and that was a great lesson in learning how to work with all the different agencies to get what we needed to through collaboration. So it does become a challenge because when you don't have the power, you can't recharge your devices. Even if cell towers are working, you'll have only limited amount of power on those batteries. So as we know, when you use Teams and other programs like that on electronic devices, it drains the battery much quicker than just sending a basic text message. So it really is a challenge. And it's something that as an organization, they're still learning and growing. And as an organization, I know they're working on getting in new equipment to help with that challenge that we experience at times.
I think even though we have all the electronic things in place today, we still prepare the paperwork like we used to do in the old days. Some of us still keep those papers in our trunks, and they're still in some of the shelter kits. And even though we know that there are different new items now, there's something called SKYA. That's
What's Skya?
SKYA is, I have no idea what it is, what the acronym, but it's a new way of putting people in the system that they go into a shelter. So people will know right away, rather than, logging each person one at a time and sending the papers to headquarters. With this new SKYA, do you know what it stands for?
It's the automated shelter.
It stands for Shelter Client Intake App.
So
He
even though-
just wanted to brag.
Right, that's it.
No, I
So-
figured.
And some of us old timers in Mass Care, we still prepare for those days where the phones will be out. We won't have that connectivity. We won't have electricity. So even though we had spotty situations, we still had it on paper. And that's what we even teach today. The newer people that come on, some of you younger people do everything electronically. My son only got a pen like recently. I said, "What, you don't need a pen?" So, he says, "I don't write anything. I put everything on whatever." But whatever the case is, it's the new and the old combined. And the Red Cross has done a good job with that. Even though that we have all these new systems come into play, no one ever tells us, get rid of those papers, we don't need them. They just tell you, put them on the side in case we need them.
I can't say I saw any challenges personally. Technology. I mean, Brian talked about, but those things happen even today, and in what we call the blue sky, the steady state, right? So I don't think I brought any real technological challenges. I think the key though, I do want to highlight what Sal said. We still need to be ready, and I think we were ready had technology gone. And coming back, then coming into the building later on the next day or 2 days after together, then makes things easier. And we have processes that we would have managed fine. I'd say IDA would not have been a big deal if technology would have failed. A challenge, but I think would have been managed.
Very good to hear. Do you have any IDA specific stories inspiring you?
I gotta tell you, it's not per se a story, but a story of a bunch of people. And I think, we talked about, you mentioned there were people from 30 states. You mentioned there was 400 plus people, but I think I want to mention some different numbers there. And it was that 75% of those people were from the greater New York region. There were local individuals. There were people from New York City, from Long Island, from Greenwich, from Rockland, from Westchester. They just got out, and some of them afraid of COVID and said, I got to get out. And, some of them a little concerned about giving hugs, to each other. Some of them concerned about being in a small room that we were sitting. But they just got out and helped people. We worked also with our partners from the city of New York, from Nassau County, from Suffolk County, from Mamaroneck, from Westchester County, Rockland County. I think those are things that are important to highlight. The people stepped up. The local people stepped up, not only Red Crossers, but our partners at a government side, our partners like Mira USA, who was another non-for-profit group that went out and started doing work with us and started to serve the community. And that I think is important to highlight, right? New Yorkers are tough and they're whatever, but New Yorkers are also very kind and care about their people. And I saw that. And to me, that was huge because I was worried as a leader here. I was worried that we were not going to have anybody come out. We're going to have to go and run the shelters ourselves. And yes, we were short, don't get me wrong. We didn't have, but we were able to manage operations. 75% of the population of the workers were from Greater New York, and I will say from the leadership of the operation, only one person came and took a role in the leadership of the operation. Everybody else is from Greater New York. To me, that's important to highlight. I think that it shows you the power of the volunteers, the people that actually are mission oriented, that want to make a difference, and the pay staff as well, right? That people just decided to, I got to work here. And then our partners, as I said, on the government side and on the non-for-profit side, just all got out together and we started doing just amazing work. I also have to say there was a lot of challenges we had, and some things were tough, but there was a lot of good things. And I think the systems, the adjustments we've done in the Red Cross paid off in Ida. We saw a lot of things that was just like, wow, pretty cool that we got that. And then we had those 30 people from different states that came over, but most of those I want to highlight were from the Northeast also, which is our division. So these were like very tight-knit groups of people working together that we actually know each other very well. And that to me is important to highlight, you know, and it was great to see for the first time of over a year, some of the individuals that we had not seen. I think that's when I met my boss at the time. I don't think I had met her. She had been with us for some time already, but we never met in person, face to face. We met through Teams. So those things were important. You know, it shows you the power of humanity, right? And I think that Ida was huge, and I think we accomplished a lot during Ida. We were not knocking anybody, but I think the Red Cross was the organization that stepped up in New York to support. And I say New York, not New York City, meaning New York, the areas that are affected by it.
Yeah. I found that there were other organizations that wanted to help in different ways, but did not have the infrastructure that the Red Cross had. And for the first time, the Red Cross stepped in and helped with different things that we hadn't done before. There was an organization in Huntington, Long Island, that had gotten together and reached out to all the undocumented people that were working in Long Island that were now out of a job and had no place to get any food. So they had made lists of all these people, found out where they were, gathered food, made bags, but had no way of delivering it. They reached out to us in the Red Cross, and I put out the call to see who would be interested. And the hands that raised were just remarkable. And we were able to, once again, did it the right way. We got the okay that came from the very top just to do that. And we supplied people with trucks, you know, one person in a vehicle, and the people in the back would hand it out. And we did that for weeks. Whenever we were able to get out there, we supplied. So we changed even the way that we worked to reach out and help different organizations at the time that we had never worked with before. You know, there are some organizations that the Red Cross doesn't know, so we don't step up to say, you know, we're here to help, because, you know, when things like that happen, everyone wants to help. But we have a way of doing things. When things like that happened, we kind of put that aside and said, you know, if we can help, let's do it. You know, when Dario, when I called Dario and said, listen, we've got this going on, you know, just be careful, you know, stay within the guidelines, do what you have to do. Let me know if there's a problem. You know, we were given a little bit of leeway that we normally weren't given, because we were there to help those people, because they didn't have an outlet. There were no trucks. You couldn't go rent a truck. You couldn't go and ask a you just couldn't do it. Most of the businesses were closed. They had no way of doing it. So the things that we did in those times were some of our greatest work, when we stepped up and said, yes, we could do that.
Thank you. That's good. Okay, anything else for comments on Hurricane Ida? Anything else you would say?
And I'm talking too much now, but that's not a new thing. I think, you know, I do want to highlight that the importance of keep working in an all hazards approach, right? Ida was an event. There was a storm. It was a hurricane, and we were worried about the South, and the South had a big operation, and we had a lot of our leadership out there working that operation. But then we got hit, and we had to operate. But this storm was very different from what we did. before, right? So it was not the coast. It was neighborhoods that you never thought about this, right? And it was water coming from the ground. It was water coming from above. But I think having an all hazards approach to the business, right, to the way we do work, allows us to just go ahead and act, right? And I think that's what's important, that we keep training, that we keep exercising and keep trying to do things and learning the ways that we do things. Because I think the work we did in Ida was amazing. And I was actually, as a leader of the team, I was very proud of the amazing work that was done. And we did things, as Sal said, I want to highlight it one more time, that were very different. And I know at the time, some individuals probably wanted to choke me when I agree with the government partners to do certain things. But when we look back, we can see that, wow, if we didn't do that, if we did not do that, and I got to give props to the DAT teams and throughout the region, if we didn't do that, what we did, who knows who could have done it? And I don't think clients would have been served as good. And it was in partnership with the government and others. But we had tools, I think as Sal said, that we were able to utilize, and it took a lot of human work, but it paid off because people were taken care of in better ways that they would not have happened. So
I think when we look back at Ida, and there's always lessons to be learned. And as an organization, we've learned lessons from Ida, from damage assessment, from feeding operations. So I think there was a lot there that we learned, and it continues to help us as an organization grow and get better and better service our clients. So as long as we keep that open mindset of how do we keep improving and getting better as a group, we're always looking at what's best for the client. And like Dario said earlier, as long as you're keeping the clients as that North Star, it really is critical, because as long as they're your main focus, we're heading in the right direction at all times.
Thank you so much. We are going to watch a quick video on Hurricane Ida, and then open for Q&A. And then we're going to open to the audience.
like watching.
Emergency in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Multiple deaths reported as the remnants of Ida merged with the front to produce chaos. For the first time in recorded history, the National Weather Service issuing a flash flood emergency for all 5 boroughs of New York City. More than 7 inches of rain in just a few hours. The Western Hemisphere's busiest subway system shut down. Waterfalls pouring down station stairs, trains pulling in to find platforms submerged, people wading through waist-high water, above ground stranded cars, and water rescues everywhere.
FDNY members rescuing someone who has been trapped in that Jeep for now well over an hour.
Our New York station, WABC, right there, as a man was finally brought to safety. And in Queens,
We're gonna open up the floor to the audience for Q&A. I don't have any questions in the chat yet. We have any questions in the room?
Hi, Frank Ferentz here. I'm a dad. And just recently supported the Mount Vernon shelter. So I got to use the Sky system on that. with 1 day notice, okay, it looks like it's a good system. On Hurricane, Ida, or what we call here the remnants of Hurricane, Ida. Thank you. On Hurricane Ida and the remnants of Ida, you know, there was a lot that was actually known before that in terms of severity. So, I mean, I'm a meteorology kind of bug, okay, and I like that. And I could tell at 9 o'clock that morning, we're gonna get a consistent on the order of 2.5 to 3 inches of rain that night. And it's predicted consistently throughout the day. So the next day when I hear no one could have expected the flare, this on the study. It's everyone expected that who had meteorological knowledge, okay? And then in terms of flooding, I think one of the things like, so I have different training. I have training outside the Red Cross, so I get it from FEMA training. And if you take a look at all the University of Hawaii, was it NDTPC or whatever the acronym is, you know, out of that consortium. There were actually, there's about 15 classes that you can take. They're all free. They're wonderful. They give you all the materials and get to exercises. We don't exercises on this type of scenario. It wasn't in New York City, but we consider coastal flooding, which comes from like storm surge. And then we have the fluvial flooding, which is from the rivers, okay? But we didn't consider fluvial flooding, which is the normal flash flood and how that moves through the air. There are a lot of places that were obvious, and even now, 2 years later, at least from the, you know, observing the city, I don't see us taking the same type of considerations, because there's still hills, there's still valleys, there's still gonna flash flood. I was out in Brooklyn the other day. There's still places where obviously flooding within minutes, you know, after the storm, and they have nothing to do with basements. Okay, and so I think the explanation that we give, which is, you know, okay, so basement here in the basement, that's a bad, you know, thing that's flooding around there. But we're not explaining it the way the science is, we as a city, you know, and I think, you know, locally on the news. I would recommend that, you know, more people take those classes so we understand we have the internal knowledge about that. And also that we can anticipate that, because there will be many more places that are obvious for us, Red Cross, for people that we're going to want to support, and we certainly care about supporting. So I suggest that the organization institutionally at the right level or the right place, you know, gather more training.
Thank you.
I guess if you have the mic, you have the responsibility for giving it to the next person.
Yes, I have a question afterward.
Good afternoon. My name is Les. I'm a member of the DSP. Getting back to Hurricane Sandy, there was mention about Connex boxes. I'm not too sure if Connex boxes have been designated for the outer remote boroughs like Queens or remote parts of Brooklyn or Staten Island or anywhere else. Are there any plans to find locations to put those Connex boxes, as we have not had the Queens office for quite a number of years? I think they closed the Queens office over 12, 15 years ago and dealt with Brooklyn. Can you look into that?
Yeah, thank you, Les. Just on the Connex boxes, by the way, Connex boxes, for anybody who does not understand what we're talking about, these are shipping containers. And they had been used, as Sal mentioned earlier, to store cots and blankets. It was actually done through a center and politics. The government side supported us to get that done, and it was a very smart thing. However, one of the challenges with a Connex box or with a shipping containers is designed to move around supplies. They come in and out, not something permanent. So they do have a lifespan. At this point, we're not going to have. We do have some in Queens and in other areas with partners like some of the colleges where we hold some supplies. What we've done is we've actually have strategically place supplies in areas, and some of them are indoors, some of them are in connexes, some of them are in our warehouse, some of them actually are owned by partners. So we do believe that we have right now the right mix of storages and supplies to support the operation. And then keeping in mind that the national organization has put a plan in place to deliver supplies. Also, as Sal said, we are a lot more clear and in tune and organized to do that. So I don't see us adding any connexes, but we do have the supplies. We also have vehicles that can move them. We actually have plans that actually allow us to then rent vehicles if we need to move. So those are things that are in place with the logistics team. I don't see us adding any more connexes at this point.
So there are places in Queens
Yes.
and elsewhere where some of the supplies are staying.
Yes, like St. John's University, for example, we do have some supplies there. And there's others, Staten Island, we have some schools as well, college and high school, where we have supplies. On Long Island, we have them co-located with the shelter. So actually within our region, we have about 100 different places where we actually have supplies. So that gives you an idea how vast it is. And the logistics team has a complete understanding, and they even have a plan. They know, and I got to tell you, that's one thing in Sandy that we're very successful at. In Ida as well, if there is a shelter in this area, they know what they're going to get the supplies out of. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I do have one card.
Mute your computer.
The computer is.
Oh, okay.
Right here, that's good.
Your phone's something.
Actually, that's technology. We have one comment from somebody online. Maureen Shea wrote in to say, your reports on the Red Cross responses to this disaster is so impressive and reflects such organization and the overall.
It's probably the speakers here. So just.
And the overwhelming willingness of people to volunteer, which I thought was lovely. For her to say, so thank you, Maureen, for joining us today. But I have a question. One thing we always ask people, this is Desiree from External Relations, is sort of what was your inspirational moment during any of these responses that you sort of, even in the middle of being so tired, and we ran out of cheese crackers or something, you didn't know what to do. What inspired you to get up and do it again and to get ready for the next one?
So for me, working closely, I was at the Dario headquarters, and like Dario said, Ida was no different than Sandy with the road closures and everything. And we were here 14, 15 hours a day, maybe longer, and then driving home. But hearing from the volunteers that were at this congregate shelter during COVID, their stories of how the clients were so appreciative of them and the work that they were doing gave me the motivation to want to do more to help making sure we're supporting them as best as possible. So for me, that was that inspirational moment.
Inspirational moment. Well, during Sandy, we were working long hours at the headquarters in Mineola. We worked until probably 8 o'clock at night every day. And then after that, some of us would go out to the different shelters and spend a few hours there, just kind of coaching along the shelter managers that were there, just to show our faces. I remember one day I walked into one of the shelters that had a couple of hundred people in it, and I found that every one of the cots had a pillow on it, and pillows are not something that we normally give out. And at first I grabbed the shelter manager. I said, "Where did you buy pillows?" I said, "You spent money on pillows?" He says, "No, a guy came in and said, and some wealthy guy, whoever he was, came in and saw that people were in these cots. He says, 'How can I help?' And somebody said to him, 'I'd love a pillow.' And somehow he went out and came back with a truckload of pillows for people, and it was heartwarming to watch people sleeping in a cot with a pillow. You know, you're so used to not seeing that. So it was nice to see that people were trying to help in whatever way they could, even just the small things like a pillow.
It is those little moments that were mentioned, right? For me, I worked many operations, and every time is that one little moment, that one little story, such as a pillow, such as, you know, knowing that somebody had a safe place to stay, you know. I get to work in the most boring place in the world, normally headquarters, so I'm not always next to the clients and supporting clients, and I'm dealing with issues and problems. But when I hear those little things, or when I go visit somewhere and I see something, those moments keep you going, right? You find out that whatever things you're working on, and I'm going to use one that didn't happen in New York, but you know, we had to implement one time in an operation, we had to implement something that at first, even the volunteers and the staff of the Red Cross felt that there was too much. We were asking too much. And this came from the national. It was an idea that was not my idea, but it was something I had to implement. And we implemented, and it was something that before I left that operation, a life was saved because of that. And the work of trying to convince people and get people to do it, and then when they all did it and they come back to me and say, Dario, we did the right thing. We saved somebody's life, right? So it's those little stories is what keeps me going. And every day you get them. You get those every day. You watch the news and you see the blanket of the Red Cross and you say, wow, that person will be cold. Something as simple as that, then he says, is worth it that I'm standing up right now at 2 o'clock in the morning, supporting the people in the field, make sure they have those blankets, right? Because somebody is not cold, or somebody is less cold, because, you know, they probably are cold, or they actually have a cot to sleep on or something like that. So those little moments, they come every single day when you work in this business. Some get to experience it right there in the spot. Some of us get to experience it from hearing or watching and seeing. So.
Thank you.
I actually have a two-part question. So I'm Gerber, one of the response managers in GMY New York City DAT. And thanks, Dario. Dario, one of the first times that I spoke with you, actually, when I joined the Red Cross back in October, one of the pieces of advice you gave me was to deploy. And I did, and it was a great experience. I was wondering if you would all take a minute to speak on one, why you feel deployment is so important, and what skills do you think the deployment could help you bring back to your own region to assist you?
You know, I can go first. So. I am huge on deployments. I have some personal issues that I haven't been able to deploy in the past couple of years, but I think hopefully those things will be changing and I'll be getting out. You said one of the reasons. One of them is when you go and deploy, right? You get to help, right? That's to me is number one. We are one movement. We have these 7 fundamental principles that talk about humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, humanity, volunteer service, unity, all that good stuff, right? You get to live it when you deploy, right? So you get to help people. That's number one. Number two, you bring that information back, whatever it is that you did. And as I said to you before, we have to change constantly. We have to learn from the disaster. So guess what? You going out there, you're going to go learn about the new thing that we had to adjust to make a difference in somebody's life. So you're going to bring that back and you're going to make us stronger locally. So that's number two. But also, I talked about earlier, for me, it's hard when you're working at home because you're dealing with so many things. When you go out and deploy, you have a little bit of an advantage, and that is that you can completely focus on that operation because you're not doing your daily work. You're not dealing with all the personal things you deal with. So you go out and you truly engulf yourself in that operation, and you can give your time, and both the rewards are strong, but also the knowledge learning is strong, right? And lastly, it's because we're humanitarians. This is what we do, right? sometimes people get in this business of emergency management, humanitarian work. Sometimes they say, it feels weird because sometimes I feel like there's some excitement in a disaster. It's not because anybody's hurt. You don't want anybody to get hurt. You don't want anybody to suffer. It's because you're making a difference. And I think that's okay, right? So when you deploy, you are making a difference because you're helping your fellow Red Crosser from that region that was affected, right? You're helping the people that were affected. You're helping your region because you're bringing the knowledge, right? So there's so many things about it. So I am huge on that. And I recommend everybody to do it. It's an experience. But I do have to say, you're going to help in a disaster. It's important to say that it's a disaster. Things are not perfect. You're there to make things better. So please understand that things are going to be crazy. Your job is to make it better. So when you see something wrong, don't get upset. Get upset, but don't complain about it so much, but more try to help fix it. Because that to me is an important thing. You're there to manage the disaster, not to be the disaster. And I'll leave it at that. Somebody.
Well, my first deployment was Katrina. And I'm a New Yorker, born and raised here, born in Brooklyn, to a Sicilian family who were immigrants. And my mother and father used to say, why you volunteer? I don't understand. What volunteer? Stay home, stay with your family, stay safe. But I felt that there was more stuff for me than just being here. I had a job, a good job here. Why did I need to go out? Because I didn't know. I just didn't know what was out there. So joining the Red Cross made me see different things. And when the opportunity arose, when Katrina hit, I said, I'd like to go. And I arrived at Katrina 5 days after it hit. The first night I spent in Alabama, slept in a warehouse on the floor. And the second night we were shipped out to Mississippi, a group of 15 of us. When they asked us at the place where we arrived, did anybody ever work as a shelter manager? And I stupidly raised my hand. So yeah, I'm a shelter manager. I'd worked in a small shelter. And when I showed up to the shelter, it was a shelter of 2,333 people. And walked in, I said, hi, I'm here as a shelter manager. And the guy handed me the keys and said, the place is yours. And he walked out. And here I'm a Sicilian kid from Brooklyn. I'm in Mississippi. For me, it was an experience. The 2 weeks that I spent there changed my life. Absolutely. It made me see different things, not just day by day, but minute by minute. I had no idea. I was absolutely out of my zone, but I got to learn how to work with people. I got to learn how different cultures see things. I got to learn different foods, different styles of talking. There were so many things that I learned on that deployment that changed my life from where it was. And when I got home, I was ready to quit because I could not believe it was that I had gone through that. And then it took me time to realize what I had learned. I couldn't wait to go home. But when I got home, I said, it was really something that truly changed my life. So given the opportunity to get out of your comfort zone and go into that, for me, once again, was life-changing. And ultimately, my son, who was 21, because of COVID, school had ended abruptly. He couldn't graduate. He graduated, of course, there was nothing there. No jobs were starting. And he came to me and said, I'd like to deploy. And he went to Louisiana and he spent 2 weeks there. And he went through the same thing that I went through. He saw the hell that was there. He saw how unprepared he was, but he learned to work with people. And I told him that as much as I'm a mass care chief and know so many people, I said, you have to do this on your own. I says, it's something that you will learn. And you know what? He had the same experience. That deployment, getting out of his comfort zone, going away, being on his own, figuring things out on his own, was just an incredible thing, and I'm glad he did it, so.
Well said.
I have one question online.
Mr. Gerber.
I'll be quick on this one. I mean, everything's really been said. The one big takeaway for me on deployment is the saying of Semper Gumby, being always flexible. A disaster is just that, a disaster. And if you are going, you have to know that you may get assigned as a shelter worker. You may arrive at DRO headquarters and told, okay, we're transferring you to feeding or to damage assessment. And just being that always flexible will make you have a better experience than if you try and put up roadblocks. So being flexible will definitely be very productive for you.
So this is a comment. So her comment is regarding Sandy response. Her home was one of the ones that burned down in Breezy Point, and she's watching the panel right now from the home that they rebuilt. She says she was dismayed that there was not a Red Cross present outside of an adequate place at Gateway for food in Breezy Point. There was negative feedback from residents, and she raised her hand several times to be deployed by disaster mental health, but was not allowed. She's asking why would a decision like that have been made at the time, and she also said that she saw Operation Blessing and Habitat for Humanity, who I know were partners of ours that we funded during after Sandy, but they were present and extraordinarily helpful to her for almost a year.
I can answer that. I'll answer it as the volunteer. How's that? I'll answer that as the volunteer. During a disaster, when a disaster happens, the Red Cross takes a stance that we go where the government tells us that we're needed. So what the Office of Emergency Management says, we want you to open a shelter here, do some feeding here. So those the first week or so during a disaster, we follow the guidelines of what they give us because it's just the way we have to work things. We are volunteers. To say, there's a neighborhood that just caught fire, we need to send people there to do feeding. Is it safe? Do we, like I said earlier, is it a place that I want to send my son or my daughter who are both volunteers? And that's the way I judge things. Sure, we wanted to help in a lot of different places, even on Long Island. There were places that we wanted to go, but we were not prepared to do that because we're not first responders. We're volunteers, we're carpenters. I sell lumber for a living. Well, what do I know about what's a safe place to go? These are what the professionals do. So we take a step back and we let them tell us where to go and when to go. Once we get prepared and we start to settle ourselves in, that's when we move in and start to help people rebuild. That I think that's always been our way of thinking. Did I miss anything on that? Your thoughts?
Yes, I was a little confused. Just confirming, we're saying that our partners, you talk about partners for the recovery piece and things like that. Yeah, okay, sorry, you were going fast with me. So I think one of the things that we also learned in Sandy was the fact that we can't do everything alone, right? We have to work together with others, and we were getting fundings, and there's a lot of organizations out there, Salvation Army, in New York specifically, NIDIS, New York Interfaith Services, and other many organizations that are good organizations that work alongside us. And one of the things that we decided to do is, because again, we're doing sheltering, we're doing feeding, we're doing all these things, was also to work with them and share some of the funds at the time to do that. Even in IDA, we actually are working with other organizations to help us supply funds to individuals that were affected by that organization. That's something that did happen in IDA. Part of the recovery work that we did in IDA was actually partnering with other organizations and funding some of the projects that they had that actually met the Red Cross standards, right? That, you know, we had to be, again, we have principles that we follow, right? So to help people based on need rather than just because they look a certain way or they don't look a certain way, right? That impartiality piece, that neutrality piece. So that is something that we did a lot in Sandy. We did a lot of grants to different groups. So that's what also you saw that sometimes we work with groups and they took on segments and pieces. I'll give you an example of IDA, Salvation Army, who again, some of the best partners I worked with in my time with the Red Cross. The lead over there and myself had a conversation one morning and he said, look, I have some flood kits and I'm going to be going to this neighborhood. And I said, good, you're going to that neighborhood. I'm not going, I'm going to go to another neighborhood because you had the same product that we had. So then we were able to then do other areas. Salvation Army was there. It was an agreement that we both had. And I've even done it in times where the Salvation Army buckets have been in a Red Cross vehicle given out, and then Red Cross buckets in a Salvation Army vehicle given out. So that's another thing that we have to understand. These disasters are so big that we've done that in the past. So yeah, so that's one of the things that did happen. I know in Sandy with partnerships where we did fund a lot of groups. We even funded help support the unmet needs roundtable. They actually, our own case workers will have to come up to these roundtables, even though we were part of the funders, to present their clients and them meeting the systems like any other NGO or organization that was supporting.
Can I add something to that? You have to remember that when a disaster hits your own hometown, a lot of the people who have trained as volunteers stay home with their families. You know, during Sandy, we have on a roster, let's say 240, 250 volunteers. If I had 40 volunteers come out, it was a lot. I mean, you just don't have them. And it takes time for the people to come in to help us. We need to wait for the cavalry to show up. But everyone's asking the same question, where's the Red Cross? So I need the help. We just don't have the people. This is a volunteer organization that has paid staff members helping us do our job. That's what people have to remember, that's just the way it is. We don't have 100 paid staff members that can go out and do the work. So when something hits our own hometown, we have to understand that it takes time for us to get out there. I just wish that we had more people. We just didn't have it.
Well said, thank you. That is going to be
What? Thank you. I'm Meredith. You talked a little bit on the New York City government and how you take kind of orders from them as far as getting started. Anything else on working with the government and working with the federal government as well? I saw Diaz up there also.
Can I just adjust that? So it's not the taking orders, it's actually we partnered together and we discussed where the areas of need. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's their home in terms of the operating, there's rules, there's laws and things like that they have to follow. But we do partner with them, and it's not just New York City, it is starts local, every disaster starts local. So we try to work with the counties. It's impossible for us to work with 291 municipalities at the same time. So we try to do it in a way that's a little bit more organized and easier to accomplish. So a lot of times we start working with the counties. In New York City, it's 1 city, 5 counties in the city. That makes it even easier in terms of the partnership. So we try to establish these partnerships in blue sky today to say, look, this is who we're going to be working with and communicate to municipalities. In the case of Ida, for example, Mamaroneck, a municipality said, no, actually, we want to open our own shelter. And we agreed to do it because we had the resources, we were able to do it. So the working's happening at a different government levels. And then there is the FEMA. There is actually a coordination that does happen with FEMA daily. But what we try to do, again, is match it a little bit better rather than, for example, FEMA Region 2 covers multiple regions. So there would be the Greater New York region and 2 other regions in New York, plus the region in New Jersey. What the Red Cross has done is created a structure that matches them. So what we will do is we will have then the individuals at the division level do the coordination with FEMA. Same thing with the state. In the state of New York, we have 3 regions. So instead of the state of New York talking to 3 of us, we actually have a representative that then coordinates with the 3 regions within New York that actually sits at the EOC in New York. So we do have the different levels. And then there's the national, right? The national organization meets with the big bosses, the FEMA also. So you try to match the different levels, and the coordination is clear. And then kind of we have this guideline on what do you accomplish at a different level, right? So at the local level, we sit down with the counties, with the city, and we say, look, this is what we are going to. They're going to ask us what they want us to do, and we say, look, this is what we can commit to do, and that gets a handshake. We put it on paper. In New York City, particularly, and Long Island also, we are written into their plans. We understand their plans. We know this is our role, and then we then act on it. And then the next layer does with the state, and the next layer goes with the federal. So it's done that way. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, and sometimes because we're so local, right? We focus on local. So South is representing Long Island primarily. I think this is good representation because during Sandy, I was New York City, Sal was Long Island, and Brian was Metro New York North. So you have kind of the 3. So we're giving you more perspective from where we were sitting that day. Today, we all 3 actually are regional. Sal's my volunteer partner. So we look at a regional, but we focus more on the local region rather than the federal. But that does exist, and it's pretty well organized, actually. It's another area that I think as the Red Cross, we've always had it, but I actually think that the way we do it today is very well.
Thank you so much. That is going to be it for our Q&A section. Thank you for attending. Doran's going to go ahead and close it out.
Thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank Brian, Dario, and Sal for their time tonight and their great insight on some of our biggest incidents. Again, We Were There panel is part of a series. This time was on natural disasters. And please mark your calendars. In September, there'll be a date coming out for our September 11th panel, which will be coming up the month after next to talk about another event that we were at where we made a huge difference. I'd like to really thank you all again for being here, and we hope to see you again next time. And if you'd like to learn more about the Red Cross response to any of these big incidents, or to what the Red Cross is doing to combat climate change, which we all know is the big combating force behind all of the natural disaster increases, if you go on the exchange, there's actually a lot of helpful resources, and your manager can also help point you in that direction. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.